This is the A to Z podcast. I'm Anthony Zanni. I'm here with Nasty Nate Ghareeb. How are you, my man? How's everything going?
I'm doing great, man. I just got home. Super excited to be here. Thank you for having me on. So
Of
looking
course.
forward to it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Listen, how do you get the nickname Nasty? How does that come about? Is that something your camp thinks of? Or
Yeah, like teammates and coaches and stuff like it. It was when I used to train back home in Massachusetts. We were just kind of like a group of like weirdos, and we it kind of like goes in with my fighting style, like alter ego that kind of comes out where when I'm fighting, I mean when I'm not fighting, I'm a pretty even keel, like nice guy. I'm not a dick. I try not to be at least. And then when I fight, it's like a totally different person. So like it becomes like the nastier side of me because people used to tell me I was too nice, and now it's like I've become this like animal in the cage, and I'm just like trying to hurt people, and I don't really care. And also, I'm kind of a disgusting human being. You know, there's a time where I was like eating raw eggs. I was eating like 12 raw eggs a day. So like everyone's like, "That's nasty. That's gross," and like I'm just a nasty human being, I guess. So it
it's
is.
stuck.
So it stuck. Yeah.
That's awesome. How did you get into MMA? Did this start early on in your life? Was this something like, hey man, I know I want to fight, or I'm a good fighter early on?
No, man. Actually, I didn't. I wasn't really much of like a fighter. Like I was an athlete and I competed in sports. Like I wasn't like a great athlete or anything like that. I played a bunch of sports growing up: soccer, baseball, football, wrestling, hockey. Like I played like every sport you can think of. I pretty much played basketball, and I eventually started wrestling in high school. Or like middle school, I guess, and then through high school, and then I would wrestle a little bit in college. And I didn't even know what MMA was. I don't come from a town where like we don't have any fighters. There's never been a fighter in our town before. There's never been people that like not I don't even think boxers. So I had no idea about fighting. I was a big fan of the WWE when I was a kid. Like I was a
Right.
huge fan of that. Like that's really what I thought I would end up doing.
Yeah.
And my senior year of high school, my wrestling coach was like, so me and a friend of mine, we grew up on the wrestling. Like we really wanted to be WWE wrestlers. Like that was our goal. And so when we got to graduation, I think it was like 2 days before, my wrestling coach, we stopped in to see him, to say goodbye to him. And he was like, what are you guys going to do now? Like, and I was like I was supposed to go to college. I applied to college. I was going to college, and but we were gonna go to this wrestling camp like out in Boston and start like training to see if we liked it. He was like, "Why would you do that?" He's like, "Why don't you do a man sport like MMA?" And because he hated like the professional wrestling stuff. He hated it. um, and I was like, "Oh man, like what is MMA?" Like I'd never heard of it. You know, I heard of guys at the time like Chuck Liddell, and Chuck Liddell was big at the time, and Anderson Silva, but I didn't know anything about it. So like he kind of planted this. That I always say is he kind of planted the seed because like at that point I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I thought about it, and I went to college, and I said, oh well, you know, I just told myself, oh, like one day like maybe I'll pursue this because I ended up getting injured. And so I couldn't go with my buddy to the wrestling. Like I broke my foot and I couldn't go. So I went with him to watch it. And I don't know if I'm really committed to driving 2 hours to come out here and do this, especially since I couldn't. And then I was supposed to leave for college. During college, I wrestled my freshman year. And then while I was wrestling, the same foot that I broke previously broke again
Oh, jeez.
in my first tournament. So I ended up having to have surgery on my foot. They put a screw in for like a Jones fracture,
Hmm.
and so I was out that whole season on crutches pretty much my entire freshman year of college because I was like broken foot, and then I waited, and then we had to do surgery, and then I waited. My sophomore year, we tried it again, tore my labrum in my shoulder. The same tournament the next year, so I went through the whole preseason, did all that, was ready to compete, tore my shoulder out, and I was like, I didn't even like wrestling. I was just like good at it, you know. And my mom really wanted me to wrestle because like I had a pretty successful career in high school. It wasn't like a state champion or anything, but like I had like 100 and I had 100 wins. You know, I won the majority of my matches, but I just didn't have like a passion for wrestling, and I still had that MMA thing in the back of my mind, and I was like, I taken some time off, and I was going through some depression, like struggling to kind of figure out who I was. I was drinking a lot and like experimenting with like drugs a little bit, like not like crazy drugs, just like, you know, like what you do in college. And I started to think about like, what do I really want out of my life? I reapplied to go to West Virginia University, and that led me to end up taking the time that summer before I left to go and actually find an MMA gym. I started training jiu-jitsu, and kickboxing. And I was like, oh, this is fucking fun. Like it was good because when you're the way I see it is when you're a competitor, you grow up competing and that's all you know. Like I didn't really work a ton. I just competed and I just played sports. Like it was like every season I had a sport. So it was like to not have that and to not be competing, it was like it was weird for me, you know, and like I'm like, who am I without sports? So I finally found something. I was like, oh, I can compete in this. You can compete in jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, you know, MMA fights, whatever. I went to West Virginia University and I found the Muay Thai club, the WV Muay Thai club. That was pretty much it at that point. Like I fell in love with striking and I spent like years just trying to perfect this craft and still trying to perfect it. And I haven't looked back ever since, you know, like this has been something that I didn't really expect. And then when like I said, my coach planted the seed 10 years, over 10 years ago, like 11, 12 years ago now. And I've just been continuously pursuing it ever since.
That's awesome. That's a hell of a story, man. So where do you want to go from here? Is there a certain position you want to be or in a certain company that you want to go to? Like what are your aspirations in the MMA world?
Yeah, that was like so the UFC was like when I was like started, like that was the only real option, right? Like Bellator was like always around, I guess, but it was never really big. I guess it was a strike force at the time. One didn't exist, PFL didn't exist, like World Series of Fighting kind of did. But like UFC was like, if you're in the UFC, you're the best. You're fighting the best. You are competing to be the best in the world. When I got into this, I was like, I don't like I said, I was like okay wrestler, but I didn't achieve what I wanted to. I wasn't a state champion. I wasn't like some, you know, phenom. And I had other people that I known who had done all those things. And like, I want to be a champion at the end of the day. Like, I want to be a world champion. And I thought about it. And like, obviously, this is going to be a tough road. But for me, the thing that made the most sense was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to be the best at it. And it was like, my grandfather said to me before he died, I worked with him for a summer and I was like half assing this job that we were doing. And he basically said to me, like, he got pissed at me because I was like cutting I was working on it like window shades with him, and I was cutting the slat smaller so that I could make a quicker job. I was like, cut them small and put them in, and he got like furious. And my man was like, he was like 92 at the time, still working,
Wow.
and he was like, he got pissed. He was like, if you're gonna do this, like, do it right. Like he was like slamming the hammer on the table. He's like, if you're gonna do it, do it right. And I like wasn't willing to like listen to him, and it wasn't until like after he passed away that I realized like what he basically was saying is like, there's no shortcuts. There's no you know, if you choose to make a decision, like you told me you wanted to do this work, you told me you wanted to do this job, then you're going to do it exactly how we like expect you to do it. And you're going to put in all the effort that you need to do so that you can like be successful at what you want to do. So it's the same thing I applied to like MMA. It's like, I didn't get in this to be a journeyman. I didn't get in this to just tell my friends, like, look at me, I'm a big bad man. Like, look how cool I am. Like, if I'm going to do this, I want to be the best in the world. So the UFC is the best promotion in the world. Everybody knows what the UFC is. When people think MMA, they think like UFC. So that is always been my goal to get to the UFC. That's where I've always aspired to be. That's what I've dreamed of for 10 years. That's like so that's where I'm going. I want to be a world champion. I want to be the best in the world. Like that is ultimately the goal. Again, I'm not here to just to compete with these guys. Like I set out to be a dominant fighter, one of the best to do it. And so that's what I'm pursuing. I'm seeking greatness and I'm seeking to be the best. Like I don't want to get in there and just compete with these guys. Like I want to fuck these guys up, you know. I want to put vicious damage on people. I want people to remember me, you know, my opponents to be like, fuck, like, was it worth it to fight this guy? You know, like what's at stake every time you step in the cage? Like I'm not the biggest guy. I'm not the strongest guy. I'm probably not the most intimidating guy. And I don't care about that. Like I know I can be smarter than these guys. And that's like what I've basically focused on is trying to be a smarter guy, more technical, and have better tactics than my opponents and go in there to destroy these guys in every way, shape, and form.
First off, you have a 9-2 record, so you're doing something very right. So that's first and foremost. Awesome advice that your grandfather gave you, and even cooler and a mature thing for you to do was you were able to reflect on it. And it might have taken you a while to reflect on it, but it's pretty neat that you've taken something that was said quite a long time ago and you've taken that with you in your career. And that's something pretty cool. I don't think a lot of people could say that.
Yeah, I think it's like I might be a little bit of a slow learner. You know, like I know I was like in high school, I was in like special ed classes and stuff. It's like, but I take the information and it's like I could hold on to it and like it could be a couple years, it could be a couple months before I really figure it out. And I'm grateful for the experiences that I have with him. He lived a long life. He died at 94, worked until 92. You know, he lived the full life, you know. So he taught me like his life experiences. Like I might not have been there through all of it, but like when I reflected on like how he lived his life and the things that he did, it really gave me insight on like how I want to live my life, and like do I want to live my life just going day by day, or do I want to have a life that at the end of it I can be like, well, I did all of these different things,
Yeah,
that I went after something. I don't have to question it. So I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it
man.
was a huge uh, moment in my life, and like I said, like I kind of wish I realized that when he was still alive. You know, those sometimes that's just how the story unfolds. So
Absolutely.
take it for what it
I'm
is.
sure he knows it now, and I'm sure he's looking down and he's proud of what you're doing and what you're accomplishing. And I mean, I can't wait to see the next step of your career and continue following it. And I hope you make it to the UFC, obviously. How do you get there though? Like there's so many fighters in the world right now. The MMA came out of nowhere, right? When I was a kid, it really, it existed. I think when I was like 10 years old, but it was like, one pay-per-view every month or so, whatever it was. Now there's fights on every week. There's so many MMA fighters in the world. How do you separate? How do you get to that next stage? And obviously, again, your record speaks for yourself, but how do you separate yourself from other people where UFC is going to say, we want to sign this guy?
That's been like the tough part for me, because it's like I try to follow the trends. Like I'm a big believer in studying and trying to understand not only your opponents but understand the game. That you
Mhm.
win the game if you understand the rules and like how you play the game. You know, I think like when I first got into it too, it was like at the time jiu-jitsu was like a huge part of it, grappling was a huge part of it, but like striking has obviously started to like change, and anti-wrestling, so like striking is a huge part of it. Most the UFC looking for guys that are going to go out there and like put on performances and fight and be entertaining. At the end of the day, this is like people want to say it's a sport. I don't look at it as a sport. This is kill or be killed. This is like as primal as it gets, like gladiator shit, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's like I'm not looking to compete with guys, and I think that is a huge part of it. I'm not going in there to win boring decision fights, and I know like the UFC wants entertaining guys. Like they try to build people based on their style and their personality. Like that's very clear. I think I'm at a point now where it's like I'm at the tipping point. Like for me, it took a little bit longer than a lot of other guys in my region. It's obviously like still see guys that have gone before me that maybe I don't know if they should have gotten there before me. But like you said before, with my grandfather's story is like there's a time and a place. Like eventually you'll figure out why. And I think for me, I've done all these different things. It's like I've won regional titles. I fought 5 rounds. I fought a bunch of tough prospects. I fought veterans. And so like it might take a little bit longer, but I think in the long run it'll be better for me, because when the time comes, it's like I'll be ready. Like I've seen and I've had to face a variety of adversities that a lot of these other guys don't get, because they're like pushed really quick, or they fight a bunch of cans and they look really good and they get to the UFC and they're shell shocked. It's like I don't anticipate getting shell shocked and I get into the UFC, because it's like I've experienced a bunch of different trials and tribulations throughout my fights that I don't think a lot of other guys get. Basically, like yeah, man, I think like getting to the UFC and you obviously go in there to win, but like go in there with the intention to hurt these guys and like perform. Because UFC, like when people watch fights, they watch for 3 reasons. According to John Danaher, who's a phenomenal coach and huge like legend in the sport, he says violence, skill, and drama. And I feel like I could bring all 3 of those things, but personally, I bring the violence and I bring the skill. So you're definitely getting 2 of the 3 at least. I think it's just like continuously getting better, man. Like a lot of guys want to they reach that point where they're like their dream is to get to the UFC and just be at that certain point. But what ends up happening is that they get there and then it's like, well, fuck, I just achieved my goal. What's next? And then
Right.
it's like it's by the time they get there, it's like, oh, I've reached my goal. Like, what's next? It's like, dude, that goal is never to just get to the UFC. The goal is to be a part of the UFC and be a name in the UFC, be a successful UFC fighter, not just a guy that got to the UFC. And I think like it's a small-minded perspective, and I think that happens when you come from small towns. And I think there's a lot of guys who come from small areas who get there, but they reach it and they're like, I reached my goal. Now what do I do? Or they're like, oh fuck, I didn't realize this is what I signed up for. Because it's like now you're fighting a real killer who's really trying to fucking kill you or hurt you. Not trying to kill you, but they're trying to hurt you. And I think guys get like intimidated by that, and they don't really, like I said, they don't pay attention to what's the game we're playing here. It's like it looks really cool. Like my friends on Facebook think I'm really, or my Instagram followers think I'm the man. But then it's like you show up and the other guy is really trying to fuck you up. It's like how are you going to respond to that? Like
Right.
know the game you're playing. Know the
Yeah.
game you're playing is basically what I'm saying. And I think like that's the difference between me and all these other guys is I know the game I'm playing. I don't know if they all know the game that they're playing. And My time is coming. It comes slower, but I don't think it's by accident. Is what I basically like to answer your question. I don't think it's by accident that it's taken me a little bit longer than everybody else. It's like this is all developmental time.
Yeah.
I'm just continuously getting better, preparing to fight the best guys in the world. I'm not preparing to fight regional guys. You got bums and Uber drivers. Like I'm here to fucking beat the best in the world. So I'm preparing to beat the best in the world. So
That's awesome. I agree with everything you said. I mean, especially with UFC, there is it's entertainment. You know what I mean? Like obviously it is what you said, and it's a very scary sport, but it is entertainment. It does have that drama aspect. So I feel like take a guy like Conor McGregor. I don't know many people that think Conor is the greatest fighter of all time, right? But Conor was the greatest entertainer of all time, which is why he got the biggest fights. It's why everybody talks about him 24/7. Like he's the biggest name that sport has ever seen. And it's not, I'm not taking away from his fighting ability. Obviously, he's a phenomenal fighter. I don't mean it like that. But was he the greatest fighter in UFC history? No, it's not even really
no,
close. But he was the greatest entertainer of all time. So it goes back to what you were saying that it does have an element of drama to it, and it is important to figure that side out. And I think you'll be really good. Obviously, being a WWE fan growing up, you're going to create some type of character and you're going to roll with that character. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, it's going to be an extension of yourself. It's just going to be you turned up to volume 10 or whatnot. But you'll let the fighting speak for yourself. And then the other side of the thing, you just got to figure out how you want to play it. But I think that's going to be the fun part for you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said before, I mean, again, when I got into this stuff, it was at a time where I'd realized, like, I have a serious fear of death. Right, I was just absolutely petrified of the concept of death. Like as a child, and like as I grew up, I was scared of everything. I was just like, I was a coward. I was a fucking coward. Like that's the best way to put it. And so there came a point where like I got out of college and I started to realize, and like, what do you want out of your life? Like I feel like people jump into things without thinking like what they really want out of the experience they're going to have. For me, I want to be able to look back on my life or be able to say I went and did all of these really cool things, have the ability to travel to fight, have the ability to go and train all over the world and meet all these wonderful, amazing, people and get experience from them, learn, like have experiences out of their lives. And I think Connor, like, he's the thing with Connor is like he made the most of his time in the UFC. Like, I know he says he wants to fight and everything and whatever. Like, he'll always go down as like everyone will always know who Conor McGregor is, like to a certain extent, like for at least a couple hundred years, people will probably know who Conor McGregor is.
Yeah.
And he did that because he made the most of his time. And I don't think people do. I think people are afraid to just like show people who they really are. They're afraid to like play their cards and they like keep it really reserved. And I think like you see guys that just kind of fold under the pressure because it's like, I have to be this guy, but I can't, like they're trying to be somebody they're not. And I think it's just authenticity. There's a lot of things that I think play into Connor's experience and his role in the UFC and MMA. But at the end of the day, like you're right, like there's an entertainment aspect and I just think people like forget that. They're so focused on like being a competitor and being and winning. There's a lot more to it. So
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I agree. Any advice for guys looking to get into MMA?
yeah, I mean, so I had a weird journey with me because it's like I trained at so many different gyms, just trying to figure out where I fit in. I think the biggest thing is like what happened was just start. If you think you want to do this stuff, like don't wait, start. Find a gym, find a place where you can just begin training, a place that's going to teach you fundamentals, a place that cares about you, not a place that's going to treat you like shit or talk badly about you. I mean, there's a lot of cults in this sport. Like what you'll see is like as like especially in local gyms, it's like a cult mentality. I don't know if you've done any martial arts, you've ever trained any of this stuff, but it's like jujitsu gyms, Thai boxing gyms, boxing gyms. It's like very cultish. It's very weird. I never liked that. I never took that approach. I've always been somebody that's kind of bounced from like I never really belonged to a certain friend group. I never really belonged to like a specific, I don't know, like a clique.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like I think the best thing is to just start somewhere. And then if you like, you're going to outgrow it. If you want to get good and you want to be the best, you're going to outgrow those places and be willing to like leave those places. Cause I find a lot of people, they're so comfortable where they are that they stay where they are. And then they never really, I don't think they ever reach their potential because they're stuck in that like one spot. I think go in with the mindset to learn, to absorb, like keep an open mind, learn as much as you can. And then from there, like continue to seek out better people to train with, seek out better trainers to learn from, like travel and check out places first and see if you like them. And then from there, just keep growing and growing and growing. I mean, that's how I approached my career. I know everybody's different. I always think of it, it's like, if you don't know how to swim, don't jump right into the deep end right away. Kind of work your way into it and then work on swimming in the shallow, and then fucking jump into the deep end once you know how to swim. Is a lot easier than just going fucking head first into the fire and seeing if you can do it. It doesn't make any sense. Like, take time, like PEMDAS, right? Like, break it down into steps and slowly increase as you go, and just keep learning. The biggest thing I can tell anybody who's gonna like do this sport is just keep learning. I think that's the best way to approach it. Don't try to be the best in the room right away. Learn first. Try to understand it. Like, understand the game. Do your research. Like, that's the best thing I can tell anybody. Just do your research.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. Lastly, you wound up moving. You're with American Top Team right now.
I am, yeah.
What was the decision going into that?
So yeah, like I said, like I've trained it all. I pretty much expended all my options here in New England. I've trained at all the top gyms I've been and trained at. All the better guys around the area, because I sought them out. Got points. Oh, I was at this gym. Oh, I learned everything I could pretty much learn. I'm not going to learn everything, but the majority of what I need to learn from this place, I've expended the options. You need to move on. And it eventually got to a point where a couple of buddies of mine, after my Bellator fight back in 2021, we started our own little spot and we were training out of. We had just a bunch of hobbyists, and like we made do with the best we could. And then we would travel to like Nick Newell's out in Connecticut, or we go to Joe Lozon's out in Boston, or Ascension in Connecticut as well. And so I was driving all over the place and doing all this stuff. And then I had my core group of guys, my striking coach I was working with at the time that I picked up, and my jiu-jitsu coach, and we worked in my parents' basement. And so like it worked for the time because it was great for skill development and just like adding on knowledge and gaining skill. But now it got to a point where my coach ended up moving down to Florida, to a different part, like northern Florida. And it kind of left me with like, what do I do? I didn't want to keep driving 2 hours to training to get the work with these guys. And it's like, they're all really good, but there's better places. My manager suggested that I go down to American Top Team. He was living down in Delray Beach, Florida, which was like 30 minutes from the gym.
Mm.
And so after I won my first title at 55, I decided that I would move down to Florida and check out American Top Team, which had been on my radar for part of like those 10 years. Like the Ultimate Fighter had come around in 2014, and it was American Top Team versus Black Zillions. So for me, it was I was a huge fan of the American Top Team, and I wanted to be a part of that team. And I've been telling myself that I would train there. And then 9 years later, I went down there to check it out. I fell in love with it. Training with the best people in the world every day, people that I've looked up to for years, and also people that are at the place that I want to be. So it was kind of a no-brainer at that point. And so my wife and I decided that we'd move down there. We got an apartment. I train there full time now, and I'm training with like my striking coach is Thiago Alves. My wrestling coach is Steve Mako. Like I'm training with Mike Brown. Like
That's amazing.
I'm training with the best people in the world. I went from training in a basement to training with the best team in the world. Like they, again, won the award for the best team in the world. And it's made a huge difference, just being surrounded by people who are where you want to be, right? I know there's a saying where it's like, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So it's like, I'm surrounded by 100 plus UFC, PFL, Bellator, ONE FC fighters that are some of them are world champions, some of them are ranked fighters, some of them are in the UFC, just in the UFC. It's like that changes your perspective. It builds your confidence. It forces you to learn. Like for me, I didn't just come here because it was like, oh, this is the best gym in the world. I went there with the intention of, no, I'm going to be at the bottom of the totem pole again, because I had risen to the top of the totem pole here in New England. So it was a matter of going there to be the bottom of the totem pole and try to climb my way back up, but against the best guys in the world, so that one day I can be the best guy in the world. That's how I got there. That's why I'm there now. That's why I'll continue to stay here, because I'm still climbing up that totem pole. Like it's a slow process, but I think it's a process in the end that'll pay dividends. It's the compound effect. Just constantly getting better with the best every day, and in a year or two, it'll just be. I'm excited to see where I'll be in a couple of years, because already like it's night and day. I'm a totally different fighter than I was before, and just being in that environment, it just makes you better. So
I look forward to seeing that, man. It goes back to what your grandfather told you before. Put the work in. You were a big fish in a small pond. You now came to the larger pond. You understand that you're going to start learning again, but you're trying every step of the way to better yourself. And 2 years from now, man, I really look forward to seeing you in the UFC. I will be there for your debut match. I promise you that. Hopefully, front row. But thank you very much for being on this. I really appreciate it. This has been the A to Z podcast. I'm Anthony Zanni. Here with Nasty Nate Ghareeb. Thank you so much for being on, brother.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.